The day my family called me worthless, stole my future, lied about me, and threw me out with nothing, they believed they were ending my story. They were wrong. I still remember the sound of my father's fist slamming onto the dining table as my mother stood silently behind him, refusing to meet my eyes. My brother held the folder containing the business, papers that should have carried my name. Instead, every page had already been changed. My signature had been forged, my inheritance erased, and my reputation destroyed before I even knew the game had begun. Then came the final blow. "Get out," my father said, tossing a small backpack onto the porch. "You deserve nothing." The neighbors watched through half-open curtains. Relatives whispered as if I were a criminal. Someone laughed. Someone recorded it on a phone. Every familiar face suddenly looked like a stranger. I looked down at the backpack. 2 shirts, a pair of worn shoes, $23 in cash. That was everything my family believed my life was worth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to expose every lie they had told about me. Instead, I picked up the bag, closed the gate behind me, and walked away without saying a single word. Silence confused them more than anger ever could. As I disappeared down the street, I heard my brother joking that I'd be begging to come home within a week. My mother never stopped him. My father never looked back. None of them realized they had just given me the greatest gift of my life. Because when people steal everything you own, they unknowingly free you to build something they can never take away. 10 years later, the same family that had celebrated my downfall stood trembling on my doorstep, desperate for help. By then, karma had already made its decision. I was the oldest son, but in our house that title carried responsibility without respect. From the time I was a teenager, I worked after school, skipped vacations, and handed most of my paycheck to my parents because I believed family came before everything else. My younger brother Daniel was different. He was charming, confident, and knew exactly what people wanted to hear. When something went wrong, it somehow became my fault. When something went right, he accepted the praise without hesitation. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than proving the truth. Our family owned a small manufacturing business started by my grandfather. I spent years learning every part of it, arriving before sunrise and leaving after dark. Employees trusted me because I listened to them. Customers returned because I kept my promises. Yet at every family dinner, my father spoke as if I contributed nothing while calling Daniel the future of this family. My mother rarely defended me. She avoided conflict by remaining silent, even when she knew I was being blamed for mistakes I hadn't made. That silence hurt more than the accusations themselves. Looking back, I understand that they never underestimated my ability. They underestimated my willingness to walk away. They believed loyalty meant accepting humiliation forever. They mistook my patience for weakness, my kindness for dependence, and my silence for surrender. They never realized I was quietly learning a lesson far more valuable than the inheritance they stole. The strongest revenge isn't destroying the people who betray you, it's building a life so strong that one day they have no choice but to stand at your door asking for the help they once denied you. The betrayal didn't begin with the forged documents. It grew quietly, one small insult at a time, until disrespect became the language my family spoke most fluently. At work, my father would ask for my opinion during meetings, nod thoughtfully, and then repeat the exact same idea a few minutes later, as if Daniel had invented it. The employees noticed. Some looked at me with sympathy, but no one challenged him. Family dinners followed the same pattern. If I arrived early to help my mother prepare the meal, she thanked Daniel for always being dependable the moment he walked through the door. I would smile anyway, telling myself that recognition wasn't the reason I helped. When relatives visited, my brother loved telling stories that made me sound awkward or incompetent. Everyone laughed while he glanced at me, waiting for a reaction. I never gave him one. My silence disappointed him more than any argument could have. The smallest moments stayed with me the longest. My father introducing Daniel as his pride while simply calling me the other son. My birthday forgotten, yet expensive gifts waiting for my brother every year. Empty pauses whenever I entered a room, followed by conversations changing before I could join them. None of it was dramatic enough to shock an outsider. That was what made it so effective. 1,000 tiny cuts leave deeper scars than a single wound. By the time they finally betrayed me in public, they had spent years teaching themselves to believe I deserved it and teaching me that sometimes the loudest form of cruelty is spoken in an ordinary voice. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday morning, not with a dramatic argument, but with a single sheet of paper. I arrived at the office before anyone else and found a copy of the company's new ownership records sitting on the conference table. My name was gone. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I read every page twice, hoping I had missed something. Then I noticed the signature beside mine. It looked convincing, close enough to fool anyone who didn't know my handwriting. But it wasn't mine. When my father and Daniel walked in, neither of them looked surprised to see me holding the documents. "You agreed to this," Daniel said calmly. "I never signed these," I replied. My father didn't even examine the papers. He simply shrugged, as if the truth no longer mattered. "What's done is done," he said. "Stop making problems for this family." In that moment, I understood something I had refused to accept for years. I wasn't losing an argument. I had already lost my place in their lives long before they stole the business. I could have called the police. I could have gathered evidence and dragged every secret into court. Maybe I would have won, but I also knew that spending years fighting people who had already decided who I was would only keep me trapped in the same prison they had built for me. So I folded the papers, placed them neatly back on the table, picked up my backpack, and walked out without another word. For the first time in my life, my silence wasn't surrender. It was a decision. The family believed they had taken everything from me. They never imagined they had just lost the only person who had been quietly holding everything together. I didn't spend the next few years thinking about revenge. I spent them making sure I would never be powerless again. The first job I found was with a struggling logistics company that needed someone willing to learn every department from the ground up. I accepted the smallest responsibilities without complaint, arrived before everyone else, and stayed until the work was finished. While others chased titles, I chased knowledge. At night, I earned professional certifications in business management, corporate finance and contract administration. I studied commercial law, negotiation, and risk management, not to fight my family, but to ensure no one could ever deceive me with paperwork again. Every document I signed, I read twice. Every agreement I made was backed by evidence, not trust alone. Over time, people noticed something my own family never had. I listened more than I spoke. Clients trusted me because I never made promises I couldn't keep. Investors respected me because I made careful decisions instead of emotional ones. Quietly, opportunities began finding me. Years later, I founded my own company with 2 former colleagues who valued integrity more than appearances. We built slowly, avoided unnecessary risks, and treated employees with the fairness I had always wished for. Growth came steadily because our reputation was stronger than any advertisement. I never searched for news about my family or wished for their downfall. I simply kept building a life so solid that, if fate ever crossed our paths again, I wouldn't need anger, arguments, or revenge to prove who I had become. Success, earned patiently and honestly, would speak far louder than I ever could. 10 years after I walked away, the knock on my front door came just after sunrise. When I opened it, my father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were bent, the confidence in his voice had disappeared, and for the first time in my life, he avoided my eyes. My mother stood beside him, twisting the strap of her handbag in nervous silence. Daniel remained a step behind them, no longer wearing the effortless smile that had once hidden every lie. No one spoke for several seconds. Then my father quietly admitted that the family business was collapsing. Lawsuits, unpaid debts, and broken contracts had pushed them to the edge. Their banks had refused another loan. Every investor had walked away. "We were told," he said carefully, "you're the only person who might be able to save it." I invited them inside, poured coffee, and listened without interrupting. Every detail confirmed what I had already suspected. They hadn't failed because I left. They had failed because honesty had left with me. When they